talk about our neighbors now, and the death of a Harare vendor in police custody after he was allegedly tortured during interrogation has raised some serious concerns. Many have been asking if Zimbabwe has gone back to the days when police and the army treated journalists like enemies of the state. According to the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights, the Zimbabwe Prisons and Correctional Services ignored requests for Hilton Tamangani to be treated by private doctors before he died from injuries sustained during the alleged torture. We talked to human rights lawyer and MDC NEC member Ngobizita Mlilo this evening. Ngobizita, good evening, and thanks for your time. So let's talk about the treatment of street vendors. I mean, government seems to be constantly removing them. Why? What threat do they pose on the streets of Harare?
I think the treatment of street vendors just dramatizes the way the state is treating ordinary Zimbabweans. The economy is not doing well. The economy has no prospects of doing well under the leadership of ZANU-PF and under the leadership of Mr. Mnangagwa, precisely because there's a crisis of legitimacy of the government. They stole an election. An illegitimate government cannot create a conducive environment for an economy. So this treatment is exactly the treatment that the ordinary Zimbabweans who are trying to eke out a living are receiving from the state. Street vendors end up in the positions they are because the levels of unemployment in Zimbabwe are so high. The productive capacity of the state and the country as a whole has collapsed. So people have to try and eke out a living by whatever means is available to them. The response to that is to send the police, is to send the military on unarmed civilians. So my own sense is that this will continue for the foreseeable future, precisely because the clash between the citizens and the state, as the economy continues to worsen, becomes more and more likely.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it almost seems like human rights abuses in the country are getting worse. And you never thought they would be worse outside of the Mugabe years and the Mugabe rule. But surely what we're seeing now is just as bad, if not worse. Well,
it's worse. And remember, even during the time of the coup, some of us did say that there was very little to celebrate the coup.
Because, that would change, yeah.
Yes, because Mr. Mnangagwa is worse than Mr. Mugabe. In fact, the violence of Kukurahundi was precisely on his hands. And the violence of Operation Mrambatsvina was also on his hands. And Mrambatsvina also represented a period in which people were trying to eke out a living, people were trying to find accommodation, and they sensed what they termed a security threat, and then went on to demolish people's houses. So in this instance as well, people are beginning to group up in the streets, sell whatever it is that they think they can sell. And it creates an environment in which there's a potential that these people may very well revolt against the state, because increasingly Zimbabweans are becoming quite aware that this regime has no capacity to turn their lives. My one sense, therefore, is that there are three things that are likely to happen. There is likely to be a continuous conscientization of Zimbabweans that the status quo is unsustainable, and therefore they have to do what is necessary and confront the state. Or an event completely unrelated to political events would trigger some form of revolt against the state. Or the third possibility being that there will be a military coup, and that military coup will probably then pave way for a transition to a democratic state. It is said that one would have to argue that there's a possibility of ushering in a democratic state through a military coup, but it remains a possibility. The possibility of Zimbabweans confronting the state by each day becomes more and more viable, because that remains the only option available.
But we've seen what happens when they know that protests are going to happen. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, there was a massive event planned that had to be called off. I mean, they really clamped down on those. So, you know, how do you successfully stand up against it now?
Well, history has shown us that people who are living under a repressive state at some point have to choose that either it's freedom or death. And I think that Zimbabweans are increasingly getting to that stage where they realize that while it is true that this regime over the years has used violence against them, this regime has no monopoly of violence. And Zimbabweans can, when pushed to do so, get to a stage where violence becomes an instrument of revolution, and violence becomes an instrument of self-liberation. In that sense, that violence becomes justifiable. So this narrative that ZANU-PF has a monopoly of violence very soon might very well prove prove to be untrue when Zimbabweans decide to say, we have tried to engage with you peacefully, we have tried to use every other constitutional means possible. You have only left us with one option, and that option is to take you on.
Give you a taste of your own medicine.
Yes, because history has shown us that those who make peaceful transitions difficult make violence ones inevitable. And I think this is the point we must continue to make to SADC and the African Union, that the possibility of Zimbabweans revolting exists. The very liberation of this continent and South Africa and everywhere else started by an attempt to cause democracy by peaceful means. When peaceful means failed, when it is now a situation where it's either I take you on or I die of hunger, I will have to find a second option of taking you on. And that possibility, to my mind, is the only option that
they will get to that.
We are there.
And what about the media? I mean, you can't exactly... The media's played a big role in you know, reporting and exposing, but we see now, again, journalists becoming targets. The one journalist assaulted by police officers while working in Harare.
Yes. So when Mr. Mnangagwa took power through a military coup, he tried to create this impression that he was creating some form of reforms in order to befriend himself with imperial powers and to befriend himself with the West. Those reforms, by their very nature, corrode the base of repression. So if you have been used to running a state by force, the moment you open the space for some form of reform, you'll be unable to control those reforms. And when Zimbabweans became more and more emboldened to say things that they wanted to say and to express themselves better, including journalists, to report on things that otherwise would have been not been reported about during the Mugabe era. Once you open the space for some form of reform, coming from a repressive state, he would be unable to control it. And I think that is where Mr. Mnangagwa
realized what he'd done.
Yes.
Oh, okay, well, I don't know. We keep wishing the people of Zimbabwe the best of luck, but this just seems like a never-ending nightmare.
We thank you.
Let's see what happens.
We thank you very much for wishing us the best.
Well, thank you very much. That's human rights lawyer and MDC NEC member Ngobizita Mlilo.